This video is brought to you by the 3-Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this year's The Games I Got Rid Of video. Now these videos are a little bit different to what I normally do. Normally I'm quite even-handed with my reviews, or at least I try to be. The games I got rid of can get a little spicy at times, especially when a game has wronged me somehow. And I'm just going to blast through these games very, very quickly. And the reason for that is I've reviewed most of these games before. If you want to see more detailed information on each game I got rid of, there's probably a review available on the channel. And for the ones that there are, I'll try to put a link in the description to each of those games. And for the games that there aren't reviews of, I'll just link to the BGG page for each game. But yes, the main reason for these videos is a bit of a cathartic exercise on my part. It's to go, these games left my collection and I'm fine with that. And in some cases, I'm really happy that they've left the collection. Because the thing is, there are games coming in just about every week, and I need to get rid of a bunch of games. I believe this is every game I got rid of this year, but I'm not 100% certain. It's certainly the vast majority of them. And we have games coming in and going out all the time, just because of the nature of working on a channel like this. Now, I try to view 1 to 2 games a week. So logically, there's about 80 games come in every year. And games going out this year, I think, is in the 40s, so there might be some that I've missed. But I definitely marked down the big, important, and interesting titles. I do have a nice pile of about 20 games down there that I'm looking to get rid of in the new year as well, but I haven't selected those because they still haven't left the house. Anyway, this is the list of games that I got rid of this year. The first game up is Frosthaven. Now, this is a game I did not get rid of because I had played it to death. Far from it. My old group got quite a way through Gloomhaven. I think we did around 40 scenarios before eventually tiring of the game. And that was mostly due to the fatigue of organising a group to get together to play it. I've played it a lot more since once the PC game came out, because I felt like I could enjoy Gloomhaven without having to organise a whole bunch of people to play it with me. And yeah, I could have kept playing it solo, but it's so much setup. And that's something the PC game saved me from doing. And Frosthaven, it is Gloomhaven on steroids. It is heavy Gloomhaven. The chances of one of my regular groups wanting to play it all the way through was around about 0. And for the review, I played it solo two-handed, and that was really just to see if they'd fundamentally changed the basics of the game. Which they hadn't. I mean, they'd tidied up some things, but it was an iterative improvement, not a dramatic leap forward. And the thing with Frosthaven is I'll probably really enjoy it as a PC game as well, because there won't be the setup time. There won't be trying to get a group together. It's such a big commitment of a game. And when you're a reviewer like me and you're trying to cover off 1 or 2 new games a week and then do the video content around them, committing to a game that's going to take, 40 plus sessions to get through, that's a serious commitment. And it's a serious commitment from my players as well. So yeah, Frosthaven, gotten rid of just because I know I'm not going to play it through. The second game on the list is almost as big as Frosthaven, and that's Youthia, Torment of Resurrection. Youthia Torment of Resurrection is kind of like an old PC game called Heroes of Might and Magic. And even if you aren't familiar with that game, you'll be familiar with its tropes. Each player plays a hero from a unique class with unique power-ups, and you travel around the board going to different points of interest, completing quests, battling monsters, and generally getting power-ups in order to face an endgame scenario. And this is just another big game, and I'm talking about playtime, I'm talking about setup time, and I'm talking about shelf space. It's a fun enough game, but it didn't capture me enough that I want to go through the rigmarole of setting it up and playing it that many times. The groups of mine that played it, they enjoyed it enough and found it to be a reasonably good game. But again, the same thing came back. It's giant. It's a huge mess. It's an experience more than a game. But ultimately, Youthia is just not the kind of game that I'm interested in playing right now. And I'm really just not vibing on the whole fantasy, leveling up, battling monsters thing anymore. Next up is Wild Space, a game that has a really tight action selection system. So you've only got 5 ships, and each of those ships gets to take 2 actions, so a total of 10 actions per game, which sounds like the kind of thing I'd be really into. A very tight action selection game where you're trying to collect sets and maximize points sounds really good to me. The problem is, it was a bit of an arbitrary game. Like a lot of these drafting games, you could only see a certain number of cards at any time. In this case, there were only 3 cards available. And if you were fishing for certain combos and they just didn't come up, well, too bad. And I found that, ultimately, after a couple of plays, a little bit arbitrary. If you got on a roll with what popped up and it went your way and you got the sets you just wanted to be after, well, congrats, you win a big game. But if they didn't come up, or if someone else was also accidentally going for the same thing as you, well, you're screwed. And that made for a kind of flat, experience. And that's why Wild Space got jettisoned into space. Over the last few years, Games Workshop have sent me a bunch of truly average games, and the Battle of Balin's Tomb was another one of them. This board game zooms in on the fight scene on the Fellowship of the Ring, where they fight the cave troll inside Balin's tomb. And that's it. That's the game. It's a two-player game where you're the Fellowship versus the Orcs. And honestly, this should have been a solo game, because the Orc player's experience is absolutely rubbish. The Fellowship player feels like they've got some decisions to make, but the Orc player is just biffing models at people and rolling dice, and if they get lucky, they win. This is a nothing burger game. It's probably only worth buying if you want some reasonable quality Fellowship models. And it might be worthwhile if you're an absolute Lord of the Rings fanboy. This year, I said goodbye to my ancient copy of Settlers of Catan. Not Catan, of course. That's the game I reviewed recently. I'm talking about its older iteration, the Settlers of Catan. Now, this feels like a little bit of a cheat because I still own Catan. But it's also a bit of a milestone because Settlers was the first Euro game I got. And that copy, I think, was 22 years old when I sold it, as I picked it up in 2001. And the only reason I got the new one is I thought it would be a little weird doing the review of Catan with a version that's that old. But it brings up a wonderful part of board gaming. My copy of Settlers of Catan was over 20 years old. Someone out there is still enjoying my 20-plus-year-old copy of the game. And that's a wonderful thing about board games. If you look after them, and I looked after my copy of Settlers, it's still absolutely playable 20 years later. And it wasn't even sleeved, and it got about 100 plays. Alrighty, we're going to do a double header now, because the next two games are Legendary Marvel and Legendary James Bond. And I got rid of them for exactly the same reason. And that reason is, I don't really like the Legendary games that much. Well, I don't like the Legendary games proper that much. I like Legendary Encounters. I think the Legendary Encounters games are much better and a much better fit for me. And I have currently on my shelf Legendary Encounters Aliens and Legendary Encounters The Matrix. I've kept those two. I didn't need 4 Legendary games on my shelf at any given time. So Marvel and James Bond, they're perfectly fine for their IPs. They're perfectly fine examples of Legendary as a system. But as I say, I prefer Legendary Encounters. And I prefer the IPs of The Matrix and Aliens as well. Well, I do like James Bond, but I did count against it that it was Legendary, not Legendary Encounters. Anyway, pass those on because I'm pretty damn sure I don't need 4 iterations of the same game. In fact, I'm probably going to get rid of The Matrix some point next year once I've played it through a few more times. Because I don't think I need 2 versions of basically the same game. The next game up is Umbrevia, a game I can't really say much about. I received a review copy of this years ago, and it was back when I was doing more polls on what games to cover on the channel next. And it just kept coming dead last. Every time it was involved in a poll, basically no one voted for it. So it was a game that just kept getting pushed back and back and back and back in the schedule until basically it fell off the end. There was no interest in the game. There was no one clamoring at me going, "Hey, Jared, where's that Umbrevia review?" It seems to be a game that came out, made very little impact, and it's just sort of gone away again. So someone else is enjoying that copy. It's a game I honestly didn't really look at that much. And sometimes that happens. Like, I try to review every game I get sent, but there's the odd one that comes in, and it just sits there, and I glance over it, and I keep glancing over it, and then eventually it goes away. And I try not to take too many games more than I plan to review. I do review, ultimately, about 95% of games that I'm sent. But yeah, sometimes a game just doesn't fit, or it doesn't click, or no one wants to play. And that was the case with Umbrevia. Got a couple of disappointing titles coming up, and the first of those is Northgard. I expected a lot more from Northgard. I'd read good things about it online, and it looked like it was a very slickly produced game, and it was going to be a sort of fast-paced, fun experience. But one of the big issues here is that I got a retail version of a game that had a bunch of Kickstarter content in it. And from what I gather, a lot of the fun parts of the game and a lot of the actual depth of the game were Kickstarter exclusives. Some of the clan powers and a few other bits and pieces that make the game a little bit more interesting and dynamic. They just weren't in the retail version. So we played a couple of games and it was a flat experience. It was nothing inspiring, nothing interesting. There were some fundamentally cool ideas about how to create regions and territories in this game. I think it was the second game where I just got a whole bunch of extra action powers. And the way the game's structured, if you have the last action and you've got extra action cards, you can just keep going. So it's a case of action chicken. The last person to act, if they've got multiple actions up their sleeve, can just go attack, 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 score, win. And it was really... Every game we played was decided by the person who hoarded the most actions. And that's bollocks to me. That makes for a really rubbish game. Where there's one clear path that you're like, okay, going last and then going 3 more times where people can't react. That is how you win the game of Northgard. Or at least the version of the game I played. And yeah, that doesn't interest me. And I was pretty glad in the end to be rid of it. No one else in my group wanted to play it again. The second disappointing game in this grouping is Hamlet, another Kickstarter game. But this time, I got given the Kickstarter version. And maybe I shouldn't have. Because this game is so busy. There's so much happening on the board. There's so many little bits of things you have to move around. It's just cumbersome. You have to play it with a bloody magnifying glass. I wanted to like this game because I like the core premise of it. I like the idea of it. But physically, it was like no one had played a physical copy of this before they published the game. Like it was tested entirely online, and then they printed out the boards, and they printed them out 60% of the size they should have been, and put all these tiny, tiny, scratchy little pieces on the board. And they said, go play with them. And then look, these sausage hands of mine, and these tiny little pieces. It was really frustrating play experience. We got through a couple of games of this before I was like, I never want to see this damn thing again. It also had this like busted ass church building in the middle that refused to stick together. And again, I think this is one of those games where the designer and publisher's ambition to make a flashy product got in the way of making a functional board game. Because there's some good ideas in Hamlet as far as gameplay and mechanics go. But actually playing it is an absolute chore. The next game's one I actually kind of regret now. And that's the original Agents of Smur. You see, I signed up for the Everything Epic version of Agents of Smur. The new revised version. And I got rid of my old version because the new hot version was coming along and it was going to be, hotter and better, and it just isn't. It's just, they fixed some things in the game, but then they absolutely, totally and utterly screwed the end of the game for me. You see, there was a module I didn't own for the original called Epic Showdowns. And what that did was change the end game from the sort of set collection push your luck kind of thing, where you're trying to get evidence, and if you get the right amount of evidence, you solve the case, into this like big story finale. And they went and changed it so every time you play, you're playing Epic Showdown mode. And these Epic Showdowns are big, and I mean big, chunks of reading. Like 20 pages of reading materials for each one. And playing it with a group, it's a lot of reading aloud. Like you're passing the book around and reading passages and going through doing these showdowns. And they take an age, and there's like 2 paths through them basically. And so yeah, if you force yourself to, you can play the game 10 times and see all those showdowns. And then you've kind of done them, you're just going through them again. And that's not what I played Agents of Smur for. I played Agents of Smur because it's a silly spy, Austin Powers, James Bond, random events generator. If you're familiar with Tales of the Arabian Nights, it is a very similar game to that, where wacky stuff happens, wacky spy stuff. You play it for the wacky spy stuff. And it used to be that you'd play 2 hours of wacky spy stuff, and then you might or you might not win. Big deal. In the new version, you play like an hour's wacky spy stuff, and then read an hour's fiction.
and it screwed the game balance for me. They are planning an expansion where they are planning on fixing this and giving an alternative way of playing the game, and that might resurrect it for me. But yeah, I am now kind of regretting getting rid of my original Agents of Smursh and keeping the new version. And if the new expansion doesn't fix, I'm probably going to get rid of my new version and try and track down an old copy. Silly me. Next up, I have 4 different games. Push, That's Not a Hat, Pinata Blast, and Disney Villains. Not to be confused with Disney Villainous. I'm not sure what to say about these. These were 4 kids' games that were sent to me by Ravensburger along with a bunch of other games. They were not asked for. I did not request review copies. They just sent them to me. And they're not really the sort of games I cover on the channel. So I didn't really know what to do with them. They kind of sat on the shelf for a good year. Then I live right by a park. So just over there is a park. And inside that park are 2 community halls. And one of those community halls is an after-school group. So I just gave the people running that group those 4 games because I popped in there for an unrelated thing and saw that the kids were playing a bunch of board games. And I was just like, hey, I've got some board games I'm not using. Do you want them? And just, here you go, have these 4 games. So I honestly can't say much about them aside from their kid-friendly games. But my wee girl, she's only 2. She's not going to be able to play these for a good 6 years. And none of my other groups were particularly interested in playing them. So while I didn't end up reviewing them, at least they went on to a reasonable place. Next we have Eternal Palace from Alley Cat Games. Alley Cat Games are one of those funny companies that I get a lot of games from them and I play a lot of their games and I like just about all their games, but none of them have ever really got their hooks into me as games I absolutely adore. And that is again the story with Eternal Palace. It's a solid enough game. It's got some dice placement stuff that's quite clever in it. It's a set collection of things. It's got some nice props and stuff in it. It's a cute game. It's perfectly acceptable. It's just a little, it's okay. I have no malice against Eternal Palace or against Alley Cat Games. It's just they seem to keep pitching these games just at that level where I'm like, oh, that's a good game. And then I kind of forget about it once I've played it a couple of times. I am really holding out hope that they send me a bona fide hit that goes straight to my heart one of these days, because they have been a really pleasant company to get games from, and they're always happy to see my reviews, even when I'm less than flattering about their games. Regusa is next, and Regusa is a very solid Euro game. It was just one of those games that was just below the sort of cut-off point for me to want to keep it. It's one of those games, again, I'd be super happy to play this at someone else's house. They brought it out, I'd be like, yay, cool, yeah, I'm happy to play Regusa. I don't think I want to teach it again, and there is some part of, especially in the sort of mid-game, where you have all these chaining actions that are a right annoyance to keep track of. So yeah, it's a good enough game. I'm not sure it's a great game, and it's certainly just, I knew it was one of those games that no one in my group was going to go, oh yeah, let's play that Regusa game again. It didn't really connect with anyone. People were like, yeah, that's fine, I like that was okay. But there wasn't really clamour to play it again. So again, getting back to that idea of a perfectly good game, but good isn't good enough to keep anymore. So in case you don't know, I am actually friends with Sam McDonald and Shem Phillips from Garfield Games. And I review a lot of their games because they are friends. Sam lives over the hill from me, and Shem lives up the coast a little. We're about 15 to 30 minutes drive away from each other. And so it's with great pains that I say I got rid of my copy of Viscounts of the West Kingdom, because Viscounts is a game I do not get. It is a game that has never clicked with me. I love Architects of the West Kingdom, and I really love Paladins of the West Kingdom. Those are 2 games I really, really dig. And I kept Viscounts as the 3rd part of that trilogy, hoping someday that game would click with me, and it doesn't. There's just something fundamentally in that game that my brain goes, nope, I want no part of this. I don't know whether it's the moving around the board with the Mansala movement, or whether it's building the things that go into the deck, or whether it's the messy thing happening in the middle of the table. The game is like oil and water with my brain. Viscounts come in, it goes out. I have come last in every single game of Viscounts of the West Kingdom I have ever played. And not not by a small amount. I have come last by a mile. There are very few games that I am that rubbish at, and Viscounts is one of them. So I finally got rid of it because it just doesn't work for me. It's just not a game that clicks with me, and that's fine. People are going to enjoy Viscounts as much as they want, just don't play it near me. And speaking of New Zealand companies, there's Gale Force 9. And Gale Force 9 have sent me a bunch of games over the years, and one of them was Tusk. And Tusk was unplayable. This isn't a game where it didn't click with me. This is a game that wasn't playtested or wasn't developed or something. This seems to be a unworked prototype that's been put in a box because it is broken out of the box. You go to the Board Game Geek page and you look up what people say about this game. Just about every comment is, this game doesn't work, it's busted, it's broken. And I opened my copy up, I had a look at it, read the rules, set it up, and was like, this is munted. This game does not function. And it's very rare to see a product hit the market that just doesn't really work, does not work as a game. I have no idea how this came into being. It's really stunning from Gale Force 9 because they have made some really good games over the years. Tyrants of the Underdark, Spartacus, Star Trek Ascendancy for starters. Those are they've done the Dune reprints and all the Dune stuff as well. Really good games, games I've loved. And in Tusk, it's this giant steaming turd. I think it's rated like a 3.3 average on Board Game Geek. I don't know, Board Game Geek's not the be-all and end-all of everything, but it's very rare that you see a game with that low a rating. Yeah, utter rubbish. I think I gave this one to someone as a freebie when they purchased another game and then apologized for doing so. And speaking of Gale Force 9, the next game up is Doctor Who Nemesis, which isn't actually that bad a game. It's a very similar idea to Disney Villainous, if you're familiar with that game. You are playing the baddies in the Doctor Who universe. This one works a lot better than Tusk. It's a functional game. I think the problem is that playing the baddies in Doctor Who is not necessarily something anyone wanted. And I found that the game really hinged on who was best at tracking the board state. So there's a whole bunch of random effects out on the board. And if you can keep track of what's going where and do a bunch of card counting and figure out what's popping up where, you can win. You need a lot of knowledge of the game to do that though. So it's one of those games where if you know the game inside and out, it's really easy to trunch all over people. But it's not fun in that regard because you're really just trying to do the same thing. You're trying to get a specific goal in a certain sequence each time you play one of the baddies. And that just feels a bit rote. So it feels like a lot of rote learning game for what is supposed to be a very interactive game. And that to me is a bit of a hollow experience. I loved the look of Starship Captains. I was really keen to get a copy of this. In fact, this is one of those games that I actually was very cheeky on Board Game Geek. The publisher had said, we've sent out copies to a whole lot of respected reviewers, and then I posted this GIF below that, indicating that, yes, you have, but you haven't sent one to me. And they ended up sending one to me, and because I was really keen to get this, because it just looked exactly like my jam. If you know, I love The Captain is Dead, and this has a lot in common with that by look and feel. But the problem I found with it is it's just this weird spaced game where it's halfway between being a family-friendly game and being a complex Euro. And it's jammed in there, but not in the good way. Like there are some games that, you know, have that simple to learn, hard to master thing. Whereas I just think Starship Captains was a reasonably shallow game that was just a bit hard to grok. And that really got under my skin in the end. And that's kind of why the game sort of fell a bit flat for me. Because I was expecting a little bit more. I'd hyped myself up too much, perhaps. And I got this game, and it's pretty, yeah, okay, move around, do some things. The staff function thing, the top where you're putting down different coloured officers to do stuff, ended up being a lot less interesting a mechanic than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be something really neat. It was basically just a way of cycling out people where, you know, you didn't get to pick a couple. Like the last two you didn't get back that next turn. I was like, oh, okay. I thought there was going to be way more shenanigans around that. And there just wasn't. And it was also one of those games that had supposed to have a sort of funny or humorous element, but it was basically just this very low-level reference gags. Like, I remember that. That's a thing from the TV show. Oh, they're making a comment about that episode that time. And that, to me, is not really comedy. That's just a reference. So I didn't find it particularly funny. The gameplay was pretty ordinary, and again, it was just too complex to be a family-friendly game and not rewarding enough to really hook me. So ultimately, I found Starship Captains a bit of a failure and got rid of it. Now to Alleycat Games' second game they sent me this year, Autoban. And Autoban is actually a very good game. I enjoyed playing Autoban quite a lot. There's a lot of things in Autoban I thought was super clever. And I just genuinely, it is a game I really liked playing. The problem is I hated teaching it and I hated managing it. Because every time you put down a road, you have to change like these values. And that did my head in when I was playing it, because I was always the one, because it's my table, of okay, you've upgraded that road, you need to change that value, that value, that value, that value. And all through the game, you're making these little fiddly changes. And it's that sort of mental burden when you're the one running the game, or it's your table, where you've got to do like a little bit of the calculations and stuff. And that's what got me, is I think I would like this as an app. I think I would like to play it on Tabletop Simulator or somewhere where those calculations were done for me. Or I would play it at someone else's house and they can damn well do it. Because I just found that a little draining. So it was a very good game, an enjoyable game to play, but an awful game to teach for some reason. It just probably needed to be de-fiddlied a little somehow. So yeah, if you do like fiddly games, and you do like games where, and that sort of mental load doesn't bother you when you're playing, you'll probably have a very good time with Autoban. But for me, it was just a little niggles in the game, and that was enough. Next up is Stroganov, a game I played once and then got rid of. And that's for the very simple reason that it's a game about Russian expansionism. And when I got the game, Russia wasn't at war with Ukraine. And now they are. And it just seemed like I'm not going to review this anytime soon, because it's a little on the nose to do a game about Russia expanding when they're trying to expand into another country right now. And I just thought, yeah, I'll just pass this one on. There's no need to cover this one on the channel right now. Intrepid was a game that I was a backer for. I backed this one on Kickstarter. This is not a review copy that I got. I got the fancy special version on Kickstarter, and I was really excited for it because it seemed like this cooperative game, a whole bunch of dice manipulation. That sounded like a lot of fun to me. I'm a big fan of Roll for the Galaxy, and I'm a big fan of cooperative board games. And yeah, Intrepid just didn't do it for me at all. It was like everyone getting together to do their math homework. We'd get together, everyone had their own little puzzles on their board, they'd do their own damn thing. We'd have a couple of talks about if someone needed an extra point or two here or there, or if they wanted to upgrade something. But for the most part, you are sitting down, doing your little dice formulas on your own sheet, and you don't give a crap what's happening out there. And this is what I kind of think of as the roll and write effect, or the tabletop simulator effect, where there are a bunch of games that have come out in the last few years where each player has their own little sphere, and they're sort of just locked in a bubble like this, and they don't really care what else is happening out there. And that's fine for a lot of people. A lot of people love that game experience because they get, their own little secure space where they can play with their bits and pieces and no one takes anything from them, and they get a sense of accomplishment. But for me, it just feels dry and dull, and if I wanted to stare at my phone in a room with other friends staring at their phones, I'd probably just do that rather than sit down and play a board game, which basically replicates that experience. So yeah, Intrepid, very disappointing game for me. I wanted this to be a lot more than it was. Very let down by how uninteractive it felt and how much of the game was really you just in your own head doing your own math. It's a very similar experience I had with Merchant's Cove. But at least Merchant's Cove felt like it was being really ambitious, even though ultimately I felt those self-contained games took away from the overall experience. At least it was a cool idea. Intrepid, it's just doing Yahtzee things by yourself. And then you go, I got 10! And then everyone else reports what they got, and that's the game. I didn't really want to get rid of Tricerion. Tricerion's a neat game. I enjoy playing Tricerion, but it has some of the things I talked about when I talked about Autoban, but even more so, because Tricerion is incredibly complex. It is a ginormous pain in the butt to teach as well. It is just an utterly nightmarish game to try to tell people how to play. It is something I never want to do again, is teach people how to play Tricerion. So it's one of those games that I would, if I went to someone's house and they had a copy there, I'd be like, yes, let us play this game. You know the rules, don't you? And if they say, yes, I know the rules quite well, I'd be like, absolutely glad to play. If there's new players, I don't think I'd want to. I don't think I'd want to spend that time with a game like Tricerion and new players again. It's one of those games that you get a lot out of it the more you play it, but it's very rare that you get the opportunity to play it. So sadly I got rid of it because I needed to get rid of space. I wasn't playing it. I didn't want to teach anyone to play it. And I already had Anachrony, which is from the same company, and I much preferred that one. Tricerion, very good game, but just it's a chore to teach. And when you're teaching around 100 games a year like I am, you get over it. Flourish is a very weird case study. It is a game that was on Kickstarter, and it was sent to me just after Kickstarter finished. So I got a copy of it, I looked up, and the Kickstarter closed like 2 days earlier, and I was like, what do you want me to do with this? Because there's no point reviewing this now, because the campaign's closed. I only just got it afterwards, and they're like, oh, don't worry about it. I was like, okay, I might review it when the game comes out. And then the game came out, and no one really cared about it. It didn't do particularly well. There's another game, a bit like Umbravia, that just came out, didn't really cause a splash. So yeah, it just sat up on the shelf, collecting dust. No one had any interest in playing it. No one asked to play it for a number of years. It's one of those games that people just glossed over. So eventually, I just let it go. Subatomic is a neat little basic deck building game. And that's about the gist of it. Like, it's one of those games from Genius Games that is a science-themed game. The science here is pretty basic. It's building molecules. And you do that using deck building components. It's fine, but the gameplay is very average. It's very run-of-the-mill deck builder by numbers. And I've got Dominion, I've got Arctic Scavengers, I've got other deck building games. So this is just a case of, do I need another deck builder? No, I don't. Next up is another Gale Force 9 game. It's Pirates of Skydock. And this one failed for me for one big reason. And that big reason is the D20. Now, D20s work in role-playing games because Dungeon Masters and Game Masters can do things to change your odds. They can give you advantage where you get multiple dice. You can do dramatic stunts. You can do things where you don't need to roll dice. In a board game, a D20 is just too big a variable. The difference between having a +1 on a character and a +3 on a character is bugger all. It's just too swingy a value, and that ruined this game for me. I think there was a good idea for a game here. I think there's some cool sort of concepts about sneaking around the ship and trying to gain fame and fortune, but everything hinged on D20 rolls, and life is too short to play board games based on D20 rolls. Next up is Dream Home, a game I was reasonably high on many years ago because it was so simple. It was such a simple, inoffensive game, you could sit down and play around with practically anyone. You could play it with your grandmother. The problem is, it's ultimately too simple. It's a game that there really isn't much in the way of decisions to be made. Like, there's some drafting going on, but there's almost always a best course of action. So while I can use this game to introduce board gaming to people who haven't played many games before, ultimately I am not having fun doing it that way. So I liked the game a lot more 5 or 6 years ago, where I think I thought less of non-gamers, which is a strange thing to say. So I was high on Dream Home because I thought non-gamers were a bit dumber than I do now. which hopefully means I've grown as a person. Next up, we have two utterly forgettable Games Workshop games, Crypt Hunters and Combat Arena. These games are junk. Almost irredeemable junk. I did a video a while back on a lot of the board games that Games Workshop had sent me, and I'm not sure what else to say. These are excuses to get a couple of models in front of people at Target or somewhere like that. The games themselves are pretty much rubbish. There's very little reason to pick up the games and play them as games. They're a way to get Games Workshop figures in front of people so they go, ooh, this might be fun to paint. I wish Games Workshop would put more effort into actually designing these games so that they're a bit more fun and a bit more playable, because they're certainly presentable. Like, they're reasonably good looking games for what they are, and the models that come with them are gorgeous. But games, for the most part, are rubbish. Next we have Brazil Imperial, the board game box most frequently mistaken for our channel mascot. Brazil Imperial was a very busy game, a very ambitious game, and a little bit of a messy game. I was very interested to see what a game about Brazil designed by Brazilians would be like, and it's fascinating that that opened up a complete can of worms, because there are two very distinct camps, it seems, around this game. One who seem to think it's an amazing homage to Brazil's heritage, the others who say it's colonial apologist propaganda. And honestly, I don't know enough about Brazil and their history to make an informed decision on this. The gameplay was fine, but I already have Scythe and I already have Rurik. And I felt like this was trying to be those two games, or it had a lot in common with those two games. Enough that it didn't feel like it had its own space within my game collection. So I actually didn't get rid of this because of its theme or its topic at all. I got rid of it just because it's a bit of a busy mess of a game. One of these days, when my wee girl is a little bit older and I have a bit more time, I might read up quite a bit more on Brazilian history. A lot of people have said that Marvel Dagger is nothing more than a reskin of Eldritch Horror, and I think that is a terrible insult to Eldritch Horror. And I don't like Eldritch Horror. I'm famously on the record for enjoying Arkham Horror 2nd Edition a hell of a lot more than Eldritch Horror, and finding Eldritch Horror the shallow, weaker version of Arkham Horror. And Marvel Dagger, it's the worst version of Eldritch Horror. I found Marvel Dagger to be an incredibly joyless experience. I felt like an overly long game that you were just playing on rote. You're playing whack-a-mole with the baddies as they turned up, and you were doing whatever your character was specialized in, and you just kept repeating that action. The game felt on rails. There's all this teamwork stuff in it that's in it, but very rarely did that make me feel like I was doing anything clever. It was very much a case of, you have to move here and spend 8 actions doing this. Okay, I've got 3 actions. Move, action, action. Next turn, action, action, action. Next turn, action, action, action. Yay, we did the 8 actions. Riveting. Marvel Dagger is a photocopy of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Next up, we have Legacy of You from Garfield Games. They're solo-only game based in China. I played this one a reasonable way through the campaign, and it's not a game for me. It's a very solid solo experience, and I can see why it has big solo fans, but it just wasn't a gameplay loop that really grabbed me. I was fine at it. I played through enough of it to get the experience, but yeah. I mean, if I'm going to play one of their games solo like that, it's probably going to be Paladins, or Circadian's First Light, or Hadrian's Wall. I've got 3 good options from the same publisher before I get onto Legacy of You. So it's just a case of Garfield Games put out a whole bunch of games with good solo modes. I don't need a dedicated solo game from them, or at least not that one. Next up is Great Western Trail, the core game. And I pretty much got rid of this because I had such a terrible experience playing Great Western Trail in New Zealand that I now just had bad vibes for the original game. And I just didn't need bad vibes in my collection, so I passed that one on. Next up is a game called Patuna, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The long and the short of this one is it came with a whole bunch of stickering that needed to be done for the game. And I opened it up one day and I just looked at it and I went, no, I don't have the brain to do this today. And I put it back on the shelf. And then I forgot about it. I forgot about it for a year. And by the time I remembered about it the next time, the window for reviewing it had passed. So I pushed that one on. I don't really know anything about the game. I didn't get past punching it out. Entirely because the punching out experience became work. And at that point of time, no doubt I was looking after a toddler at the time, so I was probably very tired. And I just went, I don't have the energy for this today, and I shelved it and then forgot about it, because I'm only human. Next is a very classic game, Twah. And Twah is a game that I will play anywhere and everywhere. I like Twah. Twah is a good, solid game. No one else in my group likes it. No one else I play with likes it. No one else ever wants to play it again with me. So it was just one of those games that I played. I was like, hey, anyone want to play this terribly dry-looking Euro game? And it's got dice manipulation, and it really just turned everyone off. So that's a game I passed on to someone else who might actually get to play it more. It's a game that if I see at a convention and people go, hey, you want to play this? You want to play 12 of us? I'll be like, yes, absolutely, I'll do that. Because it's a very good game. It's just not a very good game for the people I play games with. The second to last game is Books of Time. And I have to admire Books of Time for its ambition. It's a really clever idea here. These are different books, and you turn the pages, and the mechanics are involving turning pages and then flipping them back. And there's 3 different books and how they're set up, and there's a lot of clever stuff here. There's some clever ideas. It's just the game's a bit rubbish. The game is just a nothing burger game. It has this really cool concept, and I want to see what someone else does with this concept of using the books and the flicking pages and having different actions on those pages. I would like to see like maybe a magic spell casting game based on this, because I think that would be really fun. But as a history game, it did not work at all. Playing it, no one felt like they were building the storybook of their history. Now, we were flicking pages and taking actions and collecting resources that would turn into things. The theming was just non-existent, or felt very non-existent. We were collecting sets. That's about it. But the idea of books and the idea of how you manipulate them, very cool. And very interested to see what they do with this next if someone else decides to utilize this mechanic again. But with Books of Time, it didn't work. So that's why I got rid of that one. Cool concept, cool idea. So again, it's like that thing I said with Merchant's Cove. I love the ambition. I love what they were trying to do. Just because it didn't work for me and I don't think it was executed well doesn't mean it's a bad idea. And the final game on the list is Moon. Now, Moon really bothered me. And it bothered me possibly more than any other game on this list, because I really like Sinister Fish's earlier games. I love Villages, and I thought Streets was pretty damn neat. And Moon, I was expecting so much of. And it's a drafting game. So one of the things with drafting games is you kind of have to do 2 things. You either all have to draft 1 card at a time and then reveal your 1 card and do that action, or you draft all your cards at once and keep them secret and then reveal and play. So we're sort of talking Sushi Go versus 7 Wonders, or It's a Wonderful World. And what Moon does is it has actions between each draft step. So someone gets a card and then they can do actions as well. And it just kills the momentum of a drafting game. Like, it just feels like a cardinal sin of a drafting game is you want it to go fast. And Moon feels 3 times longer than it needs to be. And it's just, I can see they were trying to do something, but it was literally the absolute wrong thing to do with a drafting game, is to put in these interrupt mechanics that slow the game down. So at the same sort of time, I played Shipwrights, the new Shipwrights of the North Sea, which is just much better drafting game. But on the evening I first played Moon, I immediately had to play a game of It's a Wonderful World as a palate cleanser. Because I had to go, wait, this isn't how draft games feel. And then play It's a Wonderful World, which took half the time and was 10 times as much fun. It just felt like Moon, at every conceivable point where there was a good decision to be made by the designers, they went, let's go the other way. Let's do the different thing. Sometimes doing the boring thing is the best thing, because at least it works. Moon, I think, as a game, breaks down. It's slow, it's grindy, it's just not a fun experience. And I was hoping for so much more from them, because I've had a really good time with their games before. And here's hoping their next one does a lot better.
So that's the list, and it did get a little spicy at times, but the vast majority of games are good. That's That's a problem that's been happening to me a lot, is there's plenty of games that are good, but, you know, there's only finite space, there's only finite time. You can't just keep every game that's got some redeeming qualities. And there are plenty of games that I'd love to play again, but I just realistically don't see myself playing with my groups, or, the worst of all, I just don't want to teach them again. So yeah, plenty of reasonable games that I got rid of for various different reasons, and a couple of absolute stinkers. So anyway, in the comments below, let me know the games you got rid of this year and why. And if you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. We do not do paid content from publishers. We don't do paid Kickstarter previews. We do none of that stuff. Our two revenue streams are Patreon and YouTube ads. And we do that in order to keep our voice as independent as possible. So if you like what you see and want to see more, please support us on Patreon. And until next time, take care all.